When you see this in the team preview, you know you're in for a horrible time. Some competitive Pokemon strategies are just hated by the community, and I'd like to explore some examples of that and why people hate them so much. I'm going to be focusing on strategies that are actually competitively relevant and viable, not gimmicky or cheesy strategies. In my video Diabolical Pokemon Strategies, you can see some ideas that are born of pure evil and often aren't even good. But that's not what I'm talking about today. You're not a terrible person if you use these strategies. They are valid and part of the metagame. They might just be a bit annoying to face. Also, this is about competitive singles. First strategy I'm talking about is Perish Tramp, which you might be familiar with as Wolfie uses this pretty often in competitive doubles, but it's used in competitive singles sometimes too. And it stretches back as far as Generation 2 OU. Perish Song is an interesting move that, when used, causes all active Pokemon in the field to faint after 3 turns. This applies to both you and the enemy. It applies to all active Pokemon. And if you switch out, this effect will fade away. So it can be a good way to force out a Pokemon that has a lot of boosts. If you use Perish Song, they eventually have to switch, or they will perish. But there is a way to prevent the enemy from switching out and force them to die from the Perish Song, and that is with the move Mean Look, which simply prevents the target from switching out. This is a combo that, if all goes well, will result in a guaranteed KO of the enemy Pokemon. In Generation 2, this Misdreavus set can use the Mean Look Perish Song combo, and the goal of this set is to just stall the turns of Perish Song, putting it out of harm's way until the enemy finally bites the dust. You can use Protect to just stall a turn, Confuse Ray to try to prevent the enemy from acting further, just sit there and wait until the Perish Song ticks down. Now you may be wondering what song is playing during the Perish Song that causes such fatal consequences. There are many theories. The prevailing theory is that it's a bar song by Shabuzi. But regardless, it's easy to see why this strategy is a bit annoying, isn't it? You're trapped and slowly dying as your opponent protects and stalls and hits you in confusion and then exits right before the Perish Song is about to affect them. It's just a little bit of a trickster's type of gaming. It's something that a little imp from the depths of hell would do if they played a Pokemon. In Gen 2 OU, this can be a way to get through passive defensive walls that don't have much of a way to threaten Pokemon such as Misdreavus or Gengar that have these tools available. And you can tear apart an enemy's defensive core with Mean Look and Perish Song in the right circumstances. I think Mean Look and Perish Song get even better in Gen 3 though, as you can combo them with Trappers. In some cases not even needing to use Mean Look. Dugtrio is legal to use in Gen 3, uniquely so, and if Dugtrio happens to hit the field against an enemy that is under the effects of Perish Song, Dugtrio can just stall out the turns and force them to slowly succumb to a torturous experience. A common way you can abuse this in Gen 3 is with the Pokemon Jynx. Jynx also learns Perish Song, and it can use Perish Song and then die on purpose against an enemy such as Metagross. After dying, it brings in Dugtrio, who can stall the remaining turns and eliminate the enemy. Gengar is also pretty good at trapping and eliminating Blissey in Gen 3, because Blissey is a common switch into Gengar, expecting special attacks. But Gengar can catch them off guard with the Mean Look Perish Song set that actually eliminates them. Even though this can be extremely annoying when you're on the receiving end of it, I don't think that this strategy is at all overpowered or problematic. It's not banned in any generation or anything. From Gen 4 onwards, this strategy really tanks in popularity and viability because it becomes so much more difficult to actually stall the turns, and all the Pokemon that get this combo are just really frail and hard to tank hits with. In Gen 2 and 3, you can get away with it more, and the metagame is slow enough that this Perish trapping can work, but even there, it is pretty telegraphed and obvious when it's going to happen. If you ever see a Misdreavus, you can be pretty certain they have Mean Look and Perish Song because, frankly, Misdreavus doesn't get much else. The Jynx interaction I just mentioned requires Jynx to faint to actually work, which is a significant opportunity cost, obviously. They're sacrificing a whole Pokemon just to set up a trap, which can be really useful, but I think it's perfectly fine to throw so much at eliminating one Pokemon. That feels balanced to me. If you see a Misdreavus or a Jynx, you can play accordingly. Go to something with Roar, because if you click Roar, you will force the enemy out and it will break the main look, allowing you to switch out. A lot of things can just KO these Pokemon too. And yes, they can follow up with the Doug Trio, but that's a significant opportunity cost, and the Doug Trio will have to cut a lot of their own HP with Substitute to be able to stall you down. So it's not as if they are necessarily loving life in that instance either. It's a trade-off. The most frustrating Perish Trapper in my opinion is probably Gengar, just because it is also a special attacker a lot of the time, and it has so many options that you can't always predict what it has. So if you go to Blissey against Gengar, you can just be ultra punished by the mean look Perish set. But even this has opportunity cost associated. If Gengar's running mean look Perish Song, it means they're not running offensive options and they are way worse as a Pokemon overall. They might be able to catch a Blissey randomly, but once that trick is revealed, their Gengar becomes a pretty useless Pokemon, vulnerable to so much more, since you now know that they don't have offensive attacks. Blissey is also not the only thing that switches in on Gengar. What if Snorlax comes in and just threatens to KO Gengar with Shadow Ball? What if Pursuit Tyranitar comes in and threatens to just KO with Crunch? This doesn't always work for them, and it's a huge risk that they have to be very careful to use properly. Another note about Perish Song is that it only has 8 PP, so it's actually very common for Perish Song to run out in a game. You can only use it 8 times total, and against Pressure Pokemon, that is even less. So this definitely keeps the move balanced. I think it's actually kind of good design to give Perish Song such low PP, so it can't be abused more than it should be. So Perish Trapping is a valid and competitively viable strategy used by some of the best players in the game, like ABR and McMagan, but it's also a reasonable strategy in my opinion. If you pull off a Perish Trap, it's probably because you strategically set up for it and the stars aligned because of your good gameplay. There is plenty of interaction to be had with this. You have to click 2 moves in succession, Mean Look and Perish Song, which is a lot of setup. That's 2 entire turns that the enemy can attack you, toxic you, ruin your life, switch to a Pokemon with Roar, do whatever. So yes, it's frustrating. Yes, some hate it, but frustration is a part of life. Shabuzi is safe for now. The next strategy I'd like to talk about is Speed Pass. Now, this is bordering on a cheese strategy, and in some iterations of it, it can be straight up cheese. But there are valid examples of tournament games where this has been used, had success, and it is a real part of the metagame in Gen 3 OU. Speed Pass is simple in concept. Baton Pass is a move that switches you out and passes stat stage changes to an ally. The goal of Speed Pass is to pass speed to a Pokemon that's usually slow, but with speed can become a monstrous threat. The most common Speed Pass recipient is Marowak, with its fantastic physical coverage and the Thip Club item to double its attack. It has incredible damage output, but it becomes even scarier with enough speed to outrun the whole metagame. With its Earthquake, HP Rock, and Double Edge, it can often sweep an entire team after just one Swords Dance boost. In most generations, Baton Pass is outright banned, but not in Gen 3, making this a legal strategy and one to be aware of. The most infamous speed passer in the game is Ninjask. Ninjask is an extraordinarily fast Pokemon with 160 base speed that exists as a speed passing machine. Its ability Speed Boost grants +1 speed every single turn, so you can very safely rack up speed boosts by using Protect and Substitute. Crucially, the enemy can't prevent you from gaining speed boosts because these options completely shield you from incoming damage. You can then Baton Pass out, bring in Marowak, survive many hits and Swords Dance up, and then sweep the whole team. That's the plan, anyway. The way that this can become a cheese strategy is when Sand Attack gets involved. Sand Attack is a move that lowers the target's accuracy by 1. By using Sand Attack, you can actually give yourself an out against teams with counterplay to this. Roar is, of course, the most common way to deal with Speed Pass teams, is by using Roar, you force the enemy to switch out and they lose all their boosts. But with Sand Attack, you can make Roar miss. This is the most frustrating thing that can ever happen, is if you go to a Pokemon with Roar, get hit with Sand Attack, and then you miss Roar. They Baton Pass to the Marowak, maybe you click Roar again and miss again, and they Swords Dance and they sweep everything. You brought the counterplay, you did everything right, but you just missed when it counted most. This is definitely cheese because you're just fishing for a good outcome. It's pretty unlikely to miss Roar, but it still happens, and it's infuriating when it does. But not all speed pass teams rely solely on luck like this. Ninjas can choose to run Toxic instead, which is a more consistent way to go. Toxic will pressure enemies with Roar by chipping them down with the poison, and as you're stalling the turns, you are at least forcing damage against them, which is the game plan. You want to eliminate their Roar Pokemon so that they cannot stop your speed pass win condition. Another way to go is to use Zapdos, who is, in my opinion, the most consistent speed passer, more so than Ninjask. Because if you see a Ninjask, they only do one thing. They speed pass and that's it. Some people use Ninjask as a physical attacker, but that is generally a terrible strategy. Zapdos, on the other hand, is not just a speed passer. It has many things it can do, from being a rest special wall to an offensive mixed threat to a wall breaker and various other things. So Zapdos can learn agility and baton pass. If you see a Zapdos, you may not necessarily think they're a speed pass Zapdos immediately. You probably just think they're a normal offensive threat. And Zapdos happens to really frighten most of the Pokemon that have Roar, like Swampert, who gets destroyed by the common Hidden Power Grass option, or an enemy Moltres. Moltres carries Roar oftentimes, and Thunderbolt will devastate them. There is also, of course, Skarmory, who doesn't want to take a Thunderbolt. So for this reason, Zapdos is pretty nice at finding an opportunity to agility up, raising its speed by 2, because it is forcing enemies out, and all the things that have Roar don't really want to stay against Zapdos. This can allow you to get that crucial baton pass past the speed to Marowak and go to the moon. The frustration towards this strategy, I think, comes from the matchup variance of it, because some matchups will be terrible for this team, even though you have the Zapdos, who can pretty well force out a lot of Roar users. If your team is solid defensively, has multiple Roar Pokemon, and a defensive Pokemon like Bold Suicune who can live a Marowak hit, the strategy will just be easily stopped. And the thing about this strategy is that it fizzles out very quickly. It is very all in on this one thing, and if this one thing fails, you're ruined. So a lot of common meta teams just deal with this easily, but this team really punishes offensive matchups. A lot of offensive teams in Gen 3 do not carry Roar at all, and don't have a strong defensive backbone. They are trying to output offense themselves and control the tempo of the game. If they ever lose that tempo, they kind of fall apart. So if you happen to pull off the agility pass to Marowak, those are the teams that get punished the most by this, because Marowak will outrun and KO just about everything, sometimes not even needing to Swords Dance to do so. This strategy is not banned either in Gen 3, although this is a point of contention. Some people think that speed passing is inherently unhealthy for the game. I would personally disagree. Yes, I think that it has matchup variance, but I think even in the worst of matchups, this is a strategy that can be identified and dealt with fairly well, at least if you're playing against the more consistent and non-cheesy versions of it. Agility Pass Zapdos is a Pokemon that kind of needs the stars to align for it to pull off its win condition, and even at the best of times, Marowak doesn't one-hit absolutely everything. You can maneuver around it with Intimidate users like Salamence and Gyarados to reduce its effectiveness, and there's also the problem of Marowak needing to find a turn to Swords Dance when it's in. What if you just stay and KO them? You might die in the process if they choose to attack you, but that's a fine price to pay to just stop them from sweeping entirely. Zapdos also only gets one shot at this. If they take too much damage, they can't agility pass ever again, or it's far less likely that they can. Once they've revealed they have this and it fails the first time, it's very unlikely they're going to get another chance. So I personally think it is not that powerful. It's a bit annoying and cheesy when you get got by it, because it's kind of a trick. But at the same time, it is sort of on the team built to prepare for this, and I think there is enough counterplay. And in a lot of cases, it feels similar to other offensive archetypes in Gen 3, like Special Offense, which have a similar aggressive all-in game plan. I do, however, have a problem with the cheesier variants of Speed Pass, like the Sand Attack one, because it takes control out of your hands and puts it more into the realm of luck. Because if you miss Roar, what the hell are you supposed to do? Roar is the hardest counter to this in the game, and missing Roar is just a death sentence that you can't even control. I'm personally amazed that Sand Attack is even still legal. I don't think that this move provides very much of anything beyond cheese, but I suppose that's a debate for another time. Another hated strategy that is also competitively viable and relevant in multiple generations is Paraspam. Paraspam is a very self-explanatory team strategy. These teams aim to spread as much paralysis against the enemy as possible and maximize the value from that paralysis. In Gen 3, Pokemon like Body Slam, Serene Grace Jirachi, and Thunderwave Starmie, Thunderwave Blissey can spread paralysis pretty effectively, and these teams often run offensive threats that benefit greatly from paralysis. Paralysis lowers the enemy's speed by 75%, meaning your slow but bulky offensive Pokemon become incredibly buffed when most of the enemy's team is paralyzed. Paralysis also will have a chance every turn to prevent the enemy from acting, a 25% chance to be full paralyzed. This inaction can be fished for, and it's very common to run a slow bulky Pokemon with Substitute to take advantage of paralysis. Tyranitar with Substitute can just substitute continuously against a paralysis target until they are inactive, and then take advantage of them from there with Rock Slide, which has a flinch chance and a paralysis chance on top to maximize the odds of inaction. Even a Pokemon like Rhydon can be used on Gen 3 Paraspam due to its access to Substitute and powerful Ground Rock Stab combination. A pretty similar Pokemon to Substitute Tyranitar. It's pretty easy to see why this is a hated strategy, because paralysis is just a frustrating status ailment. Getting paralyzed is never fun. It introduces constant dice rolls, as there's always a 25% chance that you are unable to act, that when you stack confusion and flinch chance on top of that, and other chances of inaction like inaccurate moves. It's just really annoying when you can't ever click an attack, and the enemy's substituting constantly, fishing for you to be inactive. A lot of people think paralysis is an imbalanced and poorly designed status ailment, actually. Not that it should be banned, but it's just a frustrating part of the game. And naturally, a team style aimed around maximizing the benefits from paralysis is pretty annoying. In Gen 3, I think it's fairly manageable, as there are plenty of Pokemon that have status curing effects like Celebi and Blissey, and even Starmie with natural cure. There are also plenty of good bulky ground types that can stomach Thunderwave, like Swampert and Flygon. But Paraspam is at its most infamous and most powerful in Generation 4 OU when Jirachi received a significant buff. Not only does Jirachi have Serene Grace Body Slam with its 60% paralysis chance, but they granted Jirachi the option of Iron Head in Gen 4, which is a Steel-type physical attack with a flinch chance. Thanks to Serene Grace, it has a 60% flinch chance. Combining paralysis and this Iron Head flinch chance in Gen 4 means that the chances of the enemy acting against a Jirachi is extraordinarily low. And Jirachi can infamously just spam Iron Head against a paralysis target, and even if you're only doing like 10% damage every time, there's a pretty decent chance to just completely eliminate that Pokemon. Which is a bit silly, isn't it? Now, there is some defense against this. Clefable is actually immune to being full paralyzed in Gen 4, that's good. There are some Pokemon that can sort of handle this, like Rotom, who is immune to Body Slam and resistant to Steel. Rotom helps. Magnezone can trap Jirachi. There are Pokemon with ×4 Steel resistance that heal more from leftovers than Jirachi deals with Iron Head. But in my experience in Gen 4, it is often very difficult to prevent a large chunk of your team from getting paralyzed, beyond Clefable, who also hates getting Iron Head flinched. Jirachi is also not the only Pokemon on the team here. There are other Pokemon that can spread paralysis, like a defensive Latias with Thunderwave. And this is also before electric types had an immunity to paralysis, so electric types can get paralyzed just like everything else. Many have told me here when I talk about this that I have a skill issue, that there's more I could do to play around Paraspam teams in Gen 4, which I believe is true. There probably is more I could do to maximize my odds of success in the Paraspam matchup, really deeply understanding all the nuances of this. But I think I'm pretty justified in saying that it's extraordinarily unfun to play against, and it's on another level here because Jirachi is the #1 Pokemon in the game, and the Body Slam Iron Head combo is the most powerful idea in Gen 4 that everything centers around. I think that makes a big difference. In Gen 3, I think there is much more control over paralysis. There is more counterplay to paralysis. In Gen 4, it doesn't feel like that is the case. And I actually do think that Gen 4 Paraspam is a problem. A lot of people want Jirachi to have its option of Iron Head banned, but this is a bit of a contentious point in the community. They kind of split down the middle on that issue. Gen 4 Paraspam might be my most hated team archetype of all time, just because it is so powerful for how annoying it is. Usually these annoying strategies are at least like a little bit off meta or not that strong, But I think Gen 4 Paraspare might be among the best teams in the game, which is just, I think it's not very good. If something like this is a top strategy in your metagame. That's just my opinion though. Up next we have an archetype called Smurf Hyper Offense that is quite controversial in Generation 5 OU. It is named after a player called Smurf, and it is categorized by being an archetype that is all in on boost sweepers and offensive Pokemon pretty much. Gen 5 is defined by permanent weather. Weather teams are central to the metagame, but Smurf Hyper Offense uniquely is a weatherless archetype, running no weather setters at all. In this sample Smurf Hyper Offense team from the Gen 5 sample teams thread, you can see that every single Pokemon on this team is an offensive threat. A big core idea of this team archetype is the use of offensive Starmie, because this is not only a fast special attacker with fantastic coverage for a lot of things, it also has Rapid Spin, which is good at supporting your Volcarona and Dragonite. Now, unlike other Rapid Spinners, Starmie is fast and it's willing to die to get rid of those rocks and enable the crucial Dragonite or Volcarona setup turns. Well, it's a great way to kill two birds with one stone here, not only running a great special attacker, but a rapid spin support for the event where rocks are up and you have to do something about it. The most controversial part of these sorts of teams are in the Volcarona and Dragonite, especially Volcarona. Now, you guys know how controversial Volcarona is throughout history, even getting banned in Gen 9 because of its abuse of terastallization and heavy-duty boots. But even before terastallization and even before heavy-duty boots, Volcarona was an extraordinarily controversial Pokemon. And it's been argued that it should be banned even in Gen 5. Volcarona, of course, has the incredibly powerful boost Quiver Dance, which raises special attack, special defense, and speed by 1. This Pokemon has been nicknamed the Matchup Moth, infamous for being able to win a game in a single turn after a Quiver Dance boost, outrunning everything, even surviving many incoming hits, and just one-shotting the entire enemy team in some cases. And it's also not uncommon for this to ramp up with multiple boosts and just become truly unstoppable. Volcarona can also pick and choose its good matchups, and you have to sort of guess what it has. If Volcarona is carrying Psychic, it will be able to deal with Tentacruel, dealing super effective damage to it. If Volcarona is carrying Hidden Power Ground, it will be able to deal with Heatran, who seems like a great switch in. It's immune to fire, resists bug. Whoops, Hidden Power Ground. Goodbye Heatran. You can also even run Hidden Power Ice as a way to hit Landorus, Therian, Gliscor, and Garchomp, who also might be able to live and one incoming hit and strike you back. Not if you have Hidden Power Ice though. Now, this iteration of Smurf Hyper Offense is legal in the current metagame, but this is not the most egregious example of it. In the past, the gem items were allowed to be used in Gen 5. These were single-use items that would boost the power of a single attack of a certain type. And these gems were kind of like the original Z moves, but they're even better than Z moves because you can use multiple on a team, and they don't get consumed if the enemy uses Protect. Using gems, Volcarona could actually just power through any check that it had, really, with the overwhelming extra damage, much like a Z move can, but with less of the commitment required. Cloyster was also legal in the past, and Cloyster is another excellent Pokemon in these sorts of teams with its Shell Smash Icicle Spear combo. Since then, gem items have been banned, and so has Cloyster entirely. So at least you don't have to deal with 5 Pokemon, each with a different gem, powering through things that are supposed to check them with little you can really do about it. And at least you don't have to deal with Cloyster, who is another matchup monster. But Volcarona remains controversial, as does this archetype in general, with its general instability and difficulty in checking all of the top threats. It's a high power level metagame where things can ramp up and KO you and sweep entire teams very quickly. And it's hard to control all of that and deal with all of that. And Volcarona feels like it exacerbates that problem a lot. Out of all these archetypes, this is the one that I've had the most personal fun using. And I even used this back when Cloyster and gems were allowed, and enjoyed the sheer power before my fingertips. You hope you can forgive me. But it's undeniable that this is a frustrating archetype because it can make the game feel like rock, paper, scissors. Like, oops, I just happened to run a team that loses to this Volcarona but not this Volcarona. It's kind of silly, isn't it? And I do understand the frustration towards it. And finally, the archetype you're probably waiting for me to talk about here, the infamous Stall, which is a rather broad team descriptor. And there is a spectrum that teams can fall under, but generally the idea of stall is to maximize defense on a team, sometimes running no offensive Pokemon whatsoever. Your aim is to run the enemy out of resources and make the game go as long as possible using concepts like healing and status refreshment and defog and protect and other such things, to just wait things out, take damage, heal it back, never die, always live. And this is an archetype that stretches very far back, probably really began in Gen 2, and it's taken on different forms over the years. Stall is of course hated because it's kind of a snooze, isn't it? You are playing against someone who is aiming to just hardly interact with you, just sit there healing, and it gets even more frustrating when you introduce into the mix mechanics like Regenerator. Regenerator being an ability that heals you when you switch out. There are some cases where you can just switch between two Regenerator Pokemon, not even expending PP, and just sit in there as the enemy cannot do anything to you whatsoever. If you do have any forms of offense or damage dealing, it's probably through annoying effects like hazards that chip the enemy down as they switch, or poison, which slowly KOs you over time as the enemy sits there healing, looking at you and laughing at your demise. The addition of the ability Unaware to the game also made stall even more frustrating, as Unaware completely ignores enemy stat stages when taking or doing damage. One of the best ways to defeat passive teams like this is with boost sweepers, like Swords Dance, Dragon Dance, Calm Mind, etc. But Unaware allows you to completely ignore all those offensive boosts and act as if they have no boosts whatsoever. The frustration towards stall is definitely understandable, and I cannot pretend that I have not had my own crash outs against stall matchups that have gone for 200 turns where I slowly lose all will to live over the course of a game. It is annoying. At the same time, though, I think that full stall, like full-on stall with no offense whatsoever, is generally kind of bad in most games. If you are so passive that you're not even dealing any damage whatsoever, it is pretty easy to power through you, especially because over the years the power level of Pokemon has increased. Wall breakers have gotten better. We have buffed knockoff. We have, in Gen 9, King Gambit, who is an incredible stall breaker. I've always been fond of adaptability Crawdaunt whenever I'm frustrated by stall, because that thing just decimates stall by spamming knockoff. There's little they can really do. Passive teams generally just get kind of destroyed in competitive Pokemon. The most successful kind of stall is probably semi-stall, which has some defensive Pokemon but also a win condition they are building towards, like a boost sweeper of some sort on their side of the field, or maybe a Pokemon that can output some offense and deal a little bit of damage like a Dragapult. And you cannot quite categorize that as full-on stall. It's semi-stall. Now you do see people run stall in Gen 9 OU, of course, and other generations. It is a valid strategy sometimes, depending on the matchup, depending on the opponent, and depending on the situation. But it is rarely ever a huge problem in a metagame, in my opinion. It's a part of the metagame, but not a scourge that's ruining everything. And if you are really frustrated by stall matchups, I think there are plenty of tools to really punish them present in the game that don't handicap you that much in other matchups, especially in Gen 9 OU where King Gambit is able to dismantle stall kind of single-handedly. Now, I do like playing stall sometimes myself, in Gen 3 specifically, but to be fair, in Gen 3 there is no Unaware or Regenerator. I think stall is a little bit more reasonable in Gen 3 and less annoying to play against. Perhaps that's my bias talking. I think stall will always exist in some form in 6v6 singles. It's just kind of something that props up in this environment. And if you don't like stall at all, and it's a real sour point for you, maybe you'd prefer VGC doubles or battle spot singles or something, where stall can't really exist in the same way. Or even aggro metagames like Little Cup, where you also can't really run stall. That's a 6v6 metagame where stall is maybe at its worst. So those are some of Pokemon's most hated strategies in history. Which one do you hate the most? Mine's Gen 4 Paraspam. I hate the Hippo, I hate the Jirachi, I hate the Clefable, I hate all of them. I hate all of them. I want them all dead. What about you though? Let me know down below in the comments, and thank you for watching.